Hello, everyone. I'm Senior Manager at Global Information Management here at Hogan Lovells. But here's a sense of what I want to try and cover during this session. A little bit about who Hogan Lovells are and the journey we've been on to get us where we are today. Some of the business drivers that sit underneath the direction that we've taken with our master data implementation, and then kind of some of the background context and thought provokers that you might be able to take away. I wanted to touch on why we chose Integration Builder in particular, why we've used it in this context, and then talk more about the specific problems that we had at Hogan Lovells, how we're using the Integration Builder product to head us down that path, solving those problems. So a little bit about Hogan Lovells. It's always great to say you work for a top 10 global law firm. I have to say, a lot of the time, that comes with a lot of caveats about how great it is. But just to give you a sense of the numbers, it's a firm of over 2,500 lawyers with kind of 2,000 or thereabouts business services staff spread globally, working behind those lawyers. We're operating out of more than 40 offices across quite a few continents there, as you can see. And the key thing here is that Hogan Lovells was formed from the combination of two international law firms, one of which had its hub in Washington, D.C. That was Hogan and Hartson, with a bunch of international offices, and the other of which was Lovells, that had also a bunch of international offices with its headquarters in London. And this combined firm that we've created continues to run with those two hubs, both operationally and down at the system level for now. I guess one day we will integrate right down at the bottom and move ourselves from our two current Active Directory forests into a single Active Directory forest. But our challenge around the day of combination, which was May 2010, was really just to get basic connectivity so that the lawyers could continue to work and start to communicate with each other. And there was an awful lot of work done in a very short amount of time by some great engineers in our IT function to get some of the basic plumbing working. And obviously in the information layer where I reside, quite a lot of day one requirement to share basic information. And it was pretty hairy to get us there, but we got the basics done and we were able to share a basic set of information. But the truth is, it was all done really using kind of rubber bands and just take a run at it, hope for the best. And that in itself created a bunch of spaghetti for us just to get us over merger day. And, you know, the challenge with this temporary stuff is that it can quite often stay around for a long, long time unless you start to figure out how you want to improve things. One of the good things about the combination for me was the opportunity to really start to get a different perspective from my new colleagues that were based over in DC on data management, data integration. And one of the things that we discovered is that whilst these two legacy firms shared a lot of common values, the path that we had taken for information management over time really were quite different. And they were driven by a number of different factors, not least of which was what I call the much more centralized model of Hogan Hartson versus the much more distributed model of Lovells. And so Lovells in particular had a challenge with the spaghetti. There's lots of systems directly coupled to each other and real problems with provenance of data as much as governance of data. So looking forward, our organization, very quickly, one of our core values is that we're one team worldwide. That's what we intend to be. That's about connecting our people and their work together across the globe. Being a global business, we want to work for large global clients on complex, multi-jurisdictional matters. And that presents a challenge both for information flow and obviously for the technology engineers to make sure that people can work and collaborate wherever they are around the globe. And as I've already touched on, we have two complex IT environments, and over time we will start to replace these kind of dual systems that we have and build up from the ground from a technology sense into a single environment. But actually, it's the other way around in the information environment. It's about building from the top downwards, from the business downwards. So we have these kind of early objectives around matter centricity. Everyone talks about matter centricity, but for us, it's about recreating the electronic matter file. You'll find, and I hope this may ring true for a number of you working in law firms, that actually email was the worst thing that could have happened to law firms in some respects, because back in the day when it was all on paper, there was one matter file, it was in a folder, in a filing cabinet, and if you wanted to look at the matter file, you went and pulled it out the filing cabinet and looked at it, and if you wrote a letter to the client, then it would go in that file, and there was no challenge with that. And then email came along, which was brilliant. There was an explosion of communication, but actually it sort of destroyed that metaphor. And the objective for information management and technology management over the years has really been to focus on how do you help lawyers work on the matter files, but all at the same time. And the challenge here is that a lot of times IT departments historically have tended to sort of come at it from an engineering or system-centric mindset. This is where delivering great technology products, but not really with the customer's view in mind, if that makes sense. So one of our key business drivers has been to desire that we have to move from this system-centric or engineering mindset to a delight the customer mindset. And in this case, that's our lawyer, but also obviously our business services staff who use these systems as well, and also the clients of the firm. The challenge here is to really start distinguishing between what I would refer to as the supply side of information and the demand side of information, recognizing that they're not the same thing. So if you're a business services personnel and member and you live all day in the finance system, working with finance transactions, or the HR system, working with HR transactions, you're on the supply side. The problem is historically that law firms that I've seen for many years really just put products in place and expected their lawyer, therefore, to speak finance or to speak HR. And so there's been this challenge in managing information from the consumer side as much as from the supply side. And that's really where all these challenges around knowledge capture and sharing, who knows what, those kinds of issues arise when the IT function is primarily an engineering function rather than a consumer function. And so, to me, we talk about consumerization of IT. In a corporate sense, for me, that's about recognizing that it's the consumer that comes first, not the technology. And the technology should dance around the consumer, not the other way around. So, with that in mind, our objective, one of our other business drivers, is to think about building systems, of course, but ones which work the way that lawyers work. And I've heard this phrase many times in other situations, but I generally think about it as being this circle of many contexts. And this idea is that irrespective of who I am in the firm, whether I am a partner, a lawyer, a fee earner, or a timekeeper, or whether I'm someone who works in the business services half of the business, really it should be all about me, not about the system I'm in when I'm doing my work. And I work in many different contexts through my day. Some of those are organizational, so the practice in our organization, we talk about practice groups and practice areas. Those are gatherings of lawyers, and the finance folks like to measure numbers against those sorts of things, but they're organizational structures. And increasingly in our business, we look at industry sector as important. There are a number of standing committees, which are another context that people work in, which kind of help drive the business. And this comes back to also around the bottom there, these services that I talked about. The context of me is not really that I want to speak HR. It's just that I should have a readily accessible context for when I am doing HR things. And it's not for me to go to HR, it's for HR to bring stuff that's relevant to me. And, you know, people talk about Web 2.0 and mashups, so that's really kind of what's at the heart of this. And then, of course, there's this productivity stuff. There's this sense that we work for large client groups, and there might be a context if you're a partner or a client relationship partner or manager, that's your context. There may be a bunch of client contexts and, of course, the work context for matters. But the key here is that I'm in the middle of it, and all of our systems should be dancing around me rather than me having to go dance with those individual systems. Hopefully this is not a new concept for most people, but it's quite hard, often in my experience, for really, really great engineering folks in IT to get their head around looking at it from the customer's point of view. So let's just talk about that. What's wrong with a system-centric view? Well, you know, this is my view, and your mileage may vary, of course, but what you see sometimes is that there's this kind of assumption that it's the system that matters, and that the data and information that's held within that system is a byproduct of having the system. So if you think about email filing, that's a really important thing for a law firm, of course, because email these days is a first-class object, and a lot of people have Exchange server or equivalent systems, and the Exchange server is there because it's the Exchange email management system, and the thought processes that go around protecting it, securing it, scaling it, are all about keeping the system running rather than switching the context of the email from it's my email to how do I now understand that it's the matter's email and I'm just one of the participants in the matter. So that's what I mean about this. If it's all about the system, we tend to sort of think about what happens when my email exchange system gets overloaded, how do I offload the archive, and what's the user experience if I now have a separate archive location for email? And then there's a bunch of things in there that really start to come to life if you look at it from the lawyer's perspective. The other thing about a system-centric view is it kind of assumes that any application solve a problem is okay. And we get into this kind of best-of-breed versus commoditization idea where historically law firms have gone and bought best-of-breed products but haven't really thought about how those products play together in an ecosystem, which is, again, about the consumer's view. And the problem with that, if you don't have that information ecosystem driving that circle of many contexts, you're not able to commoditize. You're not able to get rid of complexity and start to think about service delivery from the customer's point of view as opposed to the maintaining and upgrading systems. The challenge there is that, of course, if you just think about systems as silos and the data sits in those systems just as a consequence of having a system, that you typically end up with data chaos. The same categorizing data being handled differently in different systems, different spellings of the things, of words that represent the same thing. That can cause issues. You end up with duplication of functionality because the functionality is driven by the system rather than by the ecosystem that it sits in. And you can, in worst cases, you end up with turf wars over data ownership. So this is where, because of these different system-centric views, with these duplicate processes, you end up with many systems of first entry, and you can get into turf wars. It's the kind of two watches problem. I've got this system that's telling me that this is true. I've got this other system that's telling me something that's slightly different is true. Which is true? And it's kind of hard to really get through that if you take a system-centric view of the world. So here's where I'm going to take a very brief digression and just talk about enterprise architecture very, very quickly. This isn't an enterprise architecture pitch. It's just to say that for all the reasons that we've talked about, the traditional IT model being system-centric, enterprise architecture, and I'm not going to talk here about the discipline or enterprise architecture in an academic sense. It's just the basic concept of it allows you to start thinking about your business from the business view, which is about the desired outcomes that you have, how that maps into data and process, separate from the applications that you run, and separate also from the technology choices that you make, whether you do it on-premises or off-premises. So this is all about moving towards a service delivery model. And so that's my pitch on enterprise architecture. I'm going to just kind of move on from that a little bit and focus in on really the data and process view. And I'm going to make a bold statement here and say that law firms are simple. When it comes to data and process, actually they're simple. We do a great job as law firms of making it really complicated. For all the foregoing reasons, we buy best-of-breed products, which separates our data when it should be integrated across different systems. Law firms are really simple. There are three core data entities. There's a client, of course, there's a matter, the work that we do for them, and then there are people that do the work, some of whom are lawyers, most of them are lawyers, I guess. Beyond that, each of those three core entities, of course, they have many other sub-entities that we depend upon as a business, but at its heart, those are the three life cycles that we have to think about. Those three entities and their life cycles are what we have to think about. In our firm, we think about the life cycle really in three stages. This pre-contractual bit where we have an interest in the client or the matter or the person, and we generally talk about that as being a prospect. You might talk about a bid for a matter or for a new client work, but it's this pre-contractual bit where we don't have a formal relationship, but we most definitely have an interest, and we're definitely expending time on that prospect. Then there's the contractual phase. This is as we begin the work, as we do the work, and as we end the work. And in terms of people, of course, that's about onboarding, changes as they go through their life cycle, the preparing to depart the organization, and then finally, after they've left the organization. And then we have that statutory phase. This is we had to know that we had a relationship with those three core entities. And so, of course, you talk about archiving and ultimately expunging information. One of the challenges, just by the by, that we've had as an organization as we've brought together these two large businesses has been around retention policy and trying to harmonize that. And I won't go into any more detail about it, but it's been a big challenge for us. I put in there also legal hold. It sort of sits in the statutory phase because it's generally driven by statutory, but of course legal hold can occur at any time in the life cycle. The key thing here is that as each of these entities progress through their life cycle, they raise events, which are process outcomes. So something happens, an event driven sometimes by a process or by an external event that causes a process, and they're straightforward things like a new person started or a person was promoted to senior associate, those kinds of things. And this is the key to it. If you have many different systems, each of which have a role of first entry, and each of those different systems is representing a subslice of one of those entities, you're going to have problems getting events raised in a uniform way and trapping them so that you can keep the rest of your business in lockstep. So, just let's talk about Integration Builder for a second. There is a great user interface with Integration Builder. It's dead easy to use. You can be up and running in no time at all. And I'll just make a quick plug here about when you first get Integration Builder in, Intap are hugely supportive. They send their experts out to your organization if that's what you want to do, and they'll spend a week working through some very detailed examples, really touching every piece of the capability of the system, and oftentimes helping you with your first process as well. And that's a big deal because that jump start is what really gets you comfortable and confident. And frankly, you don't see that in many other organizations. That was a real good thing for us when we signed up for Integration Builder. The thing is, the design surface gives you this idea of rapid and iterative solution development, this really short build, measure, learn cycle. You build it, you get it out there, you measure its effectiveness, you learn from that, and you're back around the block again. Highly agile, really great, rapid time to market. As Norm's mentioned, very wide out-of-box connectivity. You know, some of these other products that sit in this sort of space are more platforms than products, is the way I would put it. You know, Integration Builder is a great platform, but it's also a great product. It comes with a lot of stuff baked in that you can get up and running with real quick. And they have those templates that you can use as well. And that was a real benefit for us as well. Just for the governance folks amongst us, change management is an important part of this. It's really simple to promote through from build to production and whatever your change management life cycle is. It's not complex. You don't have to redo it at each stage. The other thing that I want to call out was the monitoring, the ability to see what's going on and quickly and easily. There's a very strong status and reporting capability into what's happening right now. So even when things go wrong, and of course they do from time to time, it's very easy to get into what happened real quick with Integration Builder. And that for me was a real positive aspect of the product. And as I already mentioned, there's over 200 templates you get right out of the box to give you a jump start. And I come back again, this intuitive learning curve, this ability to try it and see is right there, and you get a load of support out of Intap up front as well. Let's talk about ways you can use Integration Builder. There's the tactical thing. This is about thinking about data provenance, because people talk about data governance all the time, and this end goal, this end game of master data is about governance and getting a grip on this and keeping everything in lockstep. But actually, when you think about where a lot of firms are now that have that spaghetti, that when you don't have a master directory, really the challenge is about provenance of data. Do I trust the source I'm getting the data from? And am I comfortable with all those different communication channels, direct system to system, that I'm going to have data that has good provenance? So you can use the integration builder in a tactical way to get you started. This idea of intelligent data shunting, starting to use rule-based data flow management and start to unpick some of that spaghetti. Starting to think about point-to-point connections. If you currently have manual rekeying, and I've seen that a lot, it's an ability to start to reduce that effort. And that's about efficiency in your organization, of course. And as I've said, it's this idea of managing data provenance by tracking where the data came from, where it's going to, and why it's getting there. Because that's a big, big problem when it comes to data management in any organization, but in law firms in particular. So the real pros of thinking about integration builder in a tactical sense are that you can get some quick wins. As I've already mentioned, this rapid build, measure, learn cycle, it gets you off the ground real quick. And maybe the last bullet on this slide is the thing that I want to call out the most. Even if you only use integration builder tactically, it gives you the ability to start to get a hold of your data. This idea that you can start to establish a center of expertise. If you have an organization that has many line of business, best of breed systems, where the people who run those systems get to make the decisions about how the data is structured, what data is captured, how the data is entered, that's kind of a big problem that you're trying to solve. By putting integration builder in a tactical way, you can start to just bring that under your control and start to establish a center of expertise, and that starts to help drive in better data provenance. So let's talk about integration builder as a strategic product. In our case, we put it alongside a human workflow tool. In our case, it happens to be MetaStorm. There are other products out there, of course. For us, it was really about starting to reduce and remove those multiple points of first entry. So this sense that you start to declare a system as the system of record, and any data that's entered in that system begins to flow into other systems and starts to get rid of that spaghetti. That's a strategic use of integration builder. This kind of idea of a service bus, and people talk about enterprise service buses, that's really what this is about. This is about starting to enforce good data management and governance. So once you've established the provenance of the data in your system of record, it's about making sure your downstream systems actually comply and receive information from that system of record and keeps your organization in better lockstep. That's what the enterprise service bus is about, and starting to think about integration builder as a strategic piece of that to drive out governance into your business. It's also about decoupling your systems, of course, and building in flexibility. If you have one on-ramp and one off-ramp for each of your systems, this is the idea of integration builder as a hub and building out the hub and spoke model. If you decide to rip out one of those systems, and that happens from time to time, then you've got one off-ramp and one on-ramp to think about rather than many, many points that you need to go fix. So for that to really work, for integration builder to really come alive as a strategic platform, you're going to need a data strategy. And I'm going to say again, of course, that enterprise architecture is great to help you think about that. You're going to need to think about a process strategy, or in particular, an events management strategy. This idea that once you have a system of record, that's the system that raises the event when something changes, and everything else should just happen as a consequence of that one event. And finally, you can't do this without support from your business. I've seen organizations where the mantra is, do whatever it takes to fix it, just don't change anything. Never going to fly. You have to get a commitment, not a wholesale commitment to the whole thing, but a commitment to start on the journey. And that's what we did for the work that we had to get done for Hogan Lovells. We didn't make a big play or a big pitch about how great the whole world was ever going to end up being. We just picked on a particular pain point, made the compelling argument, and started to move forward on it. And that's really where we started to focus on master data. So for us, the key energy is, again, this provenance of data and governance. So it's about the core reference data that gets used, the names of your office locations, the way you organize yourself in regions if you're that kind of business, and so on and so forth. And coupled to that, of course, people data, because it really is all about me, back to that circle of many contacts. And I can't do that for our customer unless I know who they are. And that's about getting people data coupled with good reference data. Client master data is actually more mature in our business. We have some challenges, of course, around having dual finance systems, but that's part and parcel of going through a combination that we went through. But we're not focused too much on that because it's more mature. I guess where the money goes, that's where the effort gets spent historically. So let's focus on the people challenges that we had. We have multiple HR systems, and I'm going to put that in inverted commas because some of those systems in our very small offices actually amount to not much more than Excel spreadsheets, and that can be a challenge. One of the other people challenges that we have is that historically our HR organization, for very valid reasons, has an operational focus which is local because different countries have different legal requirements. Maternity law is different in every jurisdiction. Any number of other, if you talk about Germany, any decision you make in Germany has to go through a works council, not the case in the UK. So you have all those kind of jurisdictional variations, and that's great. HR needs to focus on that operationally. The challenge for us is that HR, whilst operating locally on the supply side, needs to be able to participate in the business on the demand side by providing proper management information and good oversight for business leaders. And we have that problem right now today, that we have limited management information that we can depend upon. If you ask our HR director, I'm sure she won't mind me saying this out in public, the best way to count our people, this was a few years ago, she said, the best way to count our people is hit the fire alarm, get them out of the building and count them. That was the closest she could come at the time. So we had to start to have a look at our people processes. As I've already talked about, the onboarding event for a person was happening in many different places, and our ability to capture that and feed it into downstream systems was a real problem for us. I'm going to show you in a second what our current process looked like and maybe point out some of the challenges that we had with it. The thing we had to get done was, though, understanding it wasn't practical for us to stop direct data entry into downstream systems today, or to go back and clean up the bad reference data system by system, because that's a huge task. And it's expensive to work with vendors to change how their systems work. And it's quite difficult to explain to someone that you can edit this field but not this field. And if it's a vendor product, they don't generally give you that level of flexibility. You're kind of a reader or a writer in a system, and that's it. And this comment, one of our partners made this to me about 5 years ago. He said, the best view we have of a person is the day they start. After that, the data in our different systems starts to drift apart. If that's the case in your business, you have a problem, you need master data. So I talked about our process, where we started. Not the big grand sales pitch to the organization, but just something that would get us good ROI and get us moving. So that's a very simplified diagram of our onboarding a person into our many different systems. Each of those boxes represents a process that was going on, some of them related, a lot of them in isolation. You'll see that a lot of those processes, nearly all of them in fact, were connected by what we refer to as a manual process, which for my money includes sending Word documents around by email containing data, no governance, no data management about that. So when we did some analysis on this, we discovered we had one or two problems. I'm not going to call out any of those problems. I think hopefully the graphic speaks for itself, but you have to know where you're starting from, I guess, however horrible it is, before you can start to figure out how you're going to get where you're going. And this really, for me, comes back to recognizing that it's a journey. So often when you hear about master data, people paint this rosy picture of how great it's going to be at the end. And oftentimes people set out to do it all at once. And I don't think you can do that. You have to do it step by step. You have to kind of take ground where you can, consolidate, take the next piece of ground where you can. So here's our problem. We needed to create a people master data directory, global reference data directory as part of an MDD environment. We had these multiple systems of entry upstream, and there wasn't really much correlation going on between those different systems. And so our very first job was to try to somehow provide a view across those different systems that we could stop the rot. So any new requirement for people data came out of MDD rather than out of yet more spaghetti going through these various different systems. So this is where we used Integration Builder on our first step. There are a bunch of very complex matching rules, transform rules, all manner of other things going on out in Integration Builder on the supply side on day one, just to do two things actually. First of all, to, as I say, give us this data set that we needed. But secondly, also to start to call out where the problems were. With that complete, we started to build out on the demand side. Now, in our case, we had a requirement to be able to multi-purpose the output from MDD in many different ways. And so we chose for our architecture to stick an OData layer in because we wanted to focus on RESTful data web services on the downside. And that's great because Integration Builder can consume those really well. And again, some demand-side rules for managing Integration Builder as the downstream data started to flow into our knowledge management system, our room booking system, our CRM, and various others along the way. On the upstream side, we also have to tackle this many places of first entry. So recognizing that our new starter process was being driven by email and Word documents, and it actually passed through 14 pairs of hands, we discovered, we had to do something about that. So the next step was to automate that, to stop the rot, to validate the data as it came in. And the first pass, we just put Metastorm in our case, as a point of first entry. That gave us the ability to validate data using data that now comes out of our global reference data set and allows us to also input directly into the master data directory rather than having to carry on running all these different complex Integration Builder rules. And we just send a notification to the operational staff for HR, finance, and AD, and they'll continue to do whatever they're going to do in their individual systems because we're not going to try and stop that on day one. With that in place, and with Metastorm now directly updating our master data directory, we're able to start really putting those systems of first entry downstream where they should belong. So they're no longer systems of record. You're starting to get rid of those turf wars. And what happens here is that we stub records into these downstream systems. So when you get a new starter in, we don't try and do everything for Active Directory. We don't try and do everything for finance. We just put the stub in because what we really care about is the key chain, the chain of keys from each of those vendor systems that collectively give us access to represent an entire person for our business. Now, I've drawn that as a one-way street. Of course, in a limited sense, you get some data feeding back as well. So when you create that stub of a person in one of those downstream systems, you're going to get an identifier come flow back up. The final piece here, you'll see there's a very small box down there on the right-hand side that says HR. That represents those multiple different HR systems. As an organization, we've now taken the decision to roll out a new HR system, initially across our international LLP, and that's where ultimately our new person intake will end up as part and parcel of that new HR system. But now I have a proper system of first record that integrates with my master data directory through Integration Builder. So I now have some simple rules upstream rather than the complex rules, and everything else continues to function downstream. So this is like a civil engineering project where the public are flowing through your building every single day, and you can't shut your building down whilst you re-engineer it. You have to keep thinking about the flows of people through that civil engineering project, keeping them safe, keeping them secure, and the same is true for the approach that we took to master data. And with that, I'm going to summarize just by saying master data is a journey. It has many waypoints, and the key thing here is to think about the steps along the way. As I said, this idea that you can take some ground, get some ROI, build on that, consolidate, and take some more ground, and allow yourself to, over time, become a center of expertise, to take control of not only the provenance of your data, but also the governance of the data, and that's critical. I'm just going to make this point. Oftentimes, people start by putting their integration tool choice, Integration Builder, in the middle, this kind of hub and spoke, and that's great for the sales diagram because it really helps explain the difference between hub and spoke versus spaghetti. But actually, as you've seen, I hope, Integration Builder is an enterprise service bus. It plays a part on the supply side and the demand side, the on-ramp and the off-ramp, if you will. So focus more on data provenance and data flow and how Integration Builder gets you there, and think about Integration Builder working separately on the supply side and the demand side. The great thing about that, of course, is Integration Builder can call its own rules. It can loop back on itself. It does all those things, and that's great. And finally, Intap as a vendor for us is a right-sized organization that really gets this, really gets legal, and they're great at taking on the journey. They really helped us out a lot, and I couldn't recommend them highly enough. And my final point there is that working with these guys has been an absolute breath of fresh air for us. We love the product. We love how it works. And I wish you, my parting shot, the very best of luck with your master data efforts. And I hope that along the way, you do think carefully about the tooling that you use and make sure you right size. Clearly, I'm biased, but I would recommend Integration Builder.